Greetings, everyone. Hi, thank you for joining us. My name is Joseph Grove. I'm Director of Communications for Animal Wellness Action and the Center for a Humane Economy. We are super excited that you have joined us for this event. The registration numbers have really pleased us. It shows that a great number of people are interested in this issue and have signed up to understand what we are going on. So appreciate it. And again, as we get started, we are certainly glad you are with us for why and how we must defeat the EATS Act. This is the fourth in our Claudia Miller Ignite series on animal welfare. And we will have about 7 more of these as we go throughout the year on various topics of interest. And because you are a subscriber to our news and information, you will receive alerts, and we hope you'll join us for each of them. We have several expert speakers to talk to you today. Dr. Jim Keene is with us. Adam Zipkin is with us from Capitol Hill, and of course, our president, Wayne Pacelli, to whom I'll turn over the microphone in a moment. A housekeeping note, questions can be placed into the Q&A section. You'll find a notification for that at the bottom of your screen. Just hit Q&A, enter a question. My colleague, Ryan Savell, who is producing this, will answer some of them. If you have questions about, for example, whether you'll receive a copy of the webinar or anything to deal with the webinar itself, and we will answer as many questions as we can relating to the substance of the issue upon the conclusion of our 3 speakers' presentations. Please be sure to visit animalwellnessaction.org and the Center for a Humane Economy.org to find all of our blogs, our press releases, all of the content we produce. I really pride us on the quality of content we put out. I think we are a very thorough, very balanced in terms of this issue, very hard-hitting organization when it comes to animal welfare issues, and I know you'll be educated by what you find on our site. And because we are a nonprofit organization, I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone that we rely on your donations for support. We run a very lean organization. Every dollar matters to us, and we put it to good use. So when you're checking out the great content we have on those 2 sites, we hope that you'll consider making us a part of your philanthropic efforts. So again, thank you. We look forward to an exciting, informative hour, and we look forward to your helping us take action to defeat the EATS Act when we're done with this presentation. All that said, I'll turn it over right now to Wayne Pacelli, our president. Wayne?
Joseph, thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight. We're really grateful for the opportunity to have this time with you. This issue of the EATS Act, which is federal legislation, partisan legislation introduced in the US House and the US Senate, is of enormous consequence for animal welfare, environmental protection, and other social concerns in our society. But before delving into that, let me just speak more broadly. We at Animal Wellness Action and the Center for Humane Economy are very, very focused on systemic change for animals. Now, we as a movement, because there are so many animals at risk, have to devote resources and must devote resources to helping rescue animals in crisis, to medicate animals who are ill or injured. The direct care part of our work is so important. But ultimately, we have to have policy solutions, corporate policy solutions, and public policy solutions, because so much of the animal use in our society is institutional uses, and in so many cases, institutional cruelty to animals. And no bigger issue numerically in terms of animals at risk than in factory farming. And one of the reasons that I have spent years working on ballot initiatives at the state level on factory farming, first in Florida in 2002 to ban gestation crates, then in Arizona to ban gestation crates and veal crates in 2006, Prop 2 in California to add in battery cage confinement of hens in that year. And then in 2016, a ballot measure in Massachusetts to deal with not just production and stopping the extreme confinement of farm animals, but also to restrict sales of pork, eggs, and veal. And then Prop 12 in 2018. These were momentously important ballot initiatives. The only reason we did them is because there were no other options for us. State legislatures, the agriculture committees were dominated by lawmakers very much aligned with agribusiness interests that didn't want to factor in animal welfare when it comes to production of farm animals. At the federal level, we've had no federal legal standards whatever for farm animals. And it was the ballot initiative process that allowed us to prove our thesis, which is that the American public is concerned about all animals, that all animals, including farm animals, deserve humane treatment. We have won every one of these ballot measures by double digits. In one case in Massachusetts in 2016 with question 3, by an incredible 56-point margin, 78 to 22, on this measure to stop gestation crates, veal crates, and battery cages. Nearly 4 in 5 voters favored this measure. We won majorities in 348 of 351 towns in Massachusetts. So the pork industry in particular fought these on the ballot, they lost. They then went to the federal courts to try to invalidate Prop 12 and by proxy, question 3. And this went to district courts, it went to the federal appellate court, and it even got to the Supreme Court. Multiple cases they had at work. In all, 12 decisions from federal courts. Every single case went our way, including in May 2023 before the US Supreme Court, where the majority found that California, in passing Prop 12, was engaging in a proper constitutional exercise, that California had the right to apply legal standards fairly when it comes to production and sales of farm animals and animal products that come from those creatures. Immediately after they lost before the Supreme Court, our adversaries at the National Pork Producers Council and their allies in Congress worked to introduce the EATS Act, which would not just repeal Prop 12 and question 3, but it would sweep up, according to one Harvard analysis, more than 1,000 state statutes that place any limits on agricultural commerce. So this is truly an existential threat to farm animal welfare campaigns. The folks involved in this effort to pass the EATS Act do not want to replace the state patchwork of laws for farm animals with a uniform federal standard. They want no legal standards at all. So I am really pleased to introduce two heroes of mine, 2 people who are doing such incredible work for animals. One is Dr. Jim Keene, and the second is Adam Zipkin. Adam Zipkin, who will be the second of the 2 guests, but I want to just mention a quick word about him. He is counsel to U.S. Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey. And Senator Booker really has demonstrated without question that he's the leading animal welfare advocate in the Congress. And he has done so much on so many fronts and makes animal issues a priority. And the person who is right there with him every step of the way is Adam Zipkin. I've worked on Capitol Hill advocating for animals for 30 years, and I've never met a staffer with this sort of commitment, this incredible appetite to take on animal issues, and the know-how to make it happen. He is counsel for Senator Booker, so we're going to hear from Adam tonight. But first, we're going to hear from Dr. Jim Keene. Jim is a veterinarian, and he's also a PhD epidemiologist from the University of Illinois. He's living on his family's 140-year-old family farm in eastern South Dakota. He worked for 15 or so years at the U.S. National Meat Animal Research Center, and he was also on the faculty at the University of Nebraska Veterinary College. And when he was at the Meat Animal Research Center, where essentially what was going on is part of the the purpose and part of the portfolio was to make agriculture even more efficient. So it was factory farming, and they were trying to dial up the intensity to get more out of the animals, to get more yield from these creatures, almost not even recognizing their biological limits. And Jim blew the whistle on the abuses that he saw, and suffered a tremendous professional hit because of his whistle-blowing activities. And Joseph, I'd like to just put a slide up that shows a little bit of the front page coverage that resulted from Jim's. This is that one. So U.S. Research Lab lets livestock suffer in quest for profit. Multiple front page stories featuring Jim's work. So Jim, I know this was a real jolt to you personally to speak out, and you were shunned by some of the folks whose activities you called into question. But we got very lucky that he's now the director of veterinary science at the Center for a Humane Economy. So Jim, thank you very much, and please give us a little bit of background on what happens with animals on these factory farms, and specifically with the gestation crates.
And Jim, you're muted, sir. So let's ask you to unmute, and we'll hear you just great.
Sorry about that, folks. There's three major points I want to make, and I think Wayne's alluded to these as well. First of all, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining this. One is that the life of a factory farm, whether it's a pig or a chicken or a feedlot steer or any of the poultry species, it's a very harsh life. And I'm going to focus tonight just on breeding sows, because that's what the major impact of, or the major change that Proposition 12 in Massachusetts Question 3 introduced. They have a very harsh life. There's about 6 million breeding sows in the US, and about 3.6 million of those are in basically total confinement for their whole adult life. So basically either in what's called a gestation crate for 4 months of pregnancy, and that's followed by a month in a farrowing crate. They get 1 week off to get bred, and they go back. It's a loop. They will do this 5 or 6 times, and then they're culled. So it's a very, very harsh life. But Cal Prop 12 and Massachusetts Question 3, it's still a harsh life, but they make that life a lot better. Instead of a 95% of their time in a cage, in a small cage, it's maybe 20%. So that's a huge improvement from the animal's point of view. And the third point I want to make is that the EATS Act, if it passes, is going to abolish, as Wayne said, not only Prop 12 and Massachusetts Question 3, it's going to make life worse for many animals, maybe especially sows and even people. Could I have the first slide, please, Joseph? I've got about 6 or 7 slides here. So, okay, so on the very left-hand side, that's a picture of a gestation crate, and they're about 2 feet wide, 7 feet long, 3 foot tall. There's bars on the top. There's a food, you can see the food in the very top, and they're designed so they can't turn around. The floor is slotted, so they defecate through the floor. So it's very tiny space. Why do they use these? Well, the swine industry will say that they've only been in place since they started coming in about in the 1980s, became widely adopted in 1990. Before that, sows were kept in open dry lots primarily. So the reason they do it, what the industry will say is, well, if you put sows together, pregnant sows are going to fight. They'll fight for dominance and fight for feed. So you get some overfat sows and some skinny cows, the less dominant ones. And so neither fat sows or skinny sows get pregnant very well. So that's the rationale they give. Of course, there's animal management ways to handle this, but people did this long before they put sows in crates. It's also the real reason is it's money, because you can put more animals in a building when you pack them in like this. Buildings are expensive. You have automated feed and watering systems. There's a trough below each of these pens where the manure and the urine drops into. So basically, it's almost a hands-off animal raising. So that's why they like it. It saves time, labor, space, and money. But as Temple Grandin is maybe the most famous animal scientist, animal welfare activist on the planet, she compares a sow living in a gestation crate to living in an airline seat where you never get access to walk in the aisle. And the dimensions are very similar to a coffin or a standard refrigerator. And I think none of us would like it if we were in that position, deprived. So the sows are deprived of normal individual and social behaviors. They're very social animals. They're a herd animal. Even though they can see each other, they have no the they can't interact in a normal way. They're immobilized, they're essentially in solitary confinement. And this, of course, results in many animal health issues. And that the only normal activities they have is they can eat, which takes about 10 minutes of their time per day, and they can defecate and urinate. And that's all they can do that would be considered normal. It's a pretty restrictive lifestyle. Next slide, please, Joseph. So the animal welfare folks, and I used to believe this myself before I had my own conversion, they will say, well, if an animal can reproduce or produce, grow, its welfare is fine. And I think that's a false description or a false definition of animal welfare. A better one, I think, is you look at the overall health, look at the animal's affective or emotional state, and look at how natural is that animal living. Is it sort of an environment that it's adapted to living in? And I would say in a gestation crate, sows fail all accounts. For basic health, for all factory farm animals, they all get specific diseases as a result of being in those factory farm conditions. So when a sow in a crate, they get osteoporosis, weak muscles, and lameness because they can't move. They get urinary tract infections, which sometimes lead to antimicrobial resistance. They get ulcers like bed sores. They get uterine prolapses, and of course, numerous bacterial and viral infections because they're immunosuppressed from the stress. In terms of their emotional or affective state, they show various stereotypies, sort of like you see a zoo animal when they might walk in circles. Well, they're so bored and frustrated from this impoverished environment that they will push the drinkers. They got little nipple drinkers without drinking. They will wave their head. They will bite the bars, and they'll be unresponsive to stimuli. You pour cold water on their back, they won't even react to it. And the third part is they live a denatured life. They're living in an environment that they're totally unadapted to, can express none of the normal behaviors, whether individual or social. This is what Bernie Rowland, who recently passed away, was a great guy. He calls lack of telos. They cannot be a pig. Next slide, please, Joseph. So here's some typical health and welfare problems you'll see. The slide on the left, there's two ulcers, two ulcers on the neck and the shoulder of the swine. You often get them on the shoulder and on the hip, which are kind of pointy spots without a lot of muscle or tissue over them. And there's a big swollen lymph node there, pus-filled lymph node. The middle photograph is a bar biting, which is a common thing. Of course, the sows will destroy their teeth chewing on metal, just like you would. And then the third slide is a sow dog sitting, which is a position they take when they're in a lot of pain. For example, if they're lame. Just like you would want to sit down. If your legs hurt all the time, you'd want to sit down as best you could. They do the best they can in the poor environment that they're forced to live in. Next slide, please, Joseph. So how do you deal with, there are alternatives to raising pigs in confinement. We did it before 1980 and 1990s, and we can do it again. Here's an example. All Prop 12 asks is be able to have freedom of movement and of at least 24 square feet per sow. Usable area per sow. These are called free access stalls. If the stall wants to get away, if it's being bothered, it can go in these little stalls and get away. It can get up whenever it wants to. That's one example of Prop 12 compliance, if there was enough space, total space per sow. Next slide, please. Now, another way you can do it, this is the way it was done on the farm I live on in the past. The sows are outdoors. This is Lehman Ranch with very high welfare, pork production on pasture in the upper right, or in hoop barns. So there's many ways you can raise in a much more extensive, where the animals can express their normal behaviors, aren't confined in a little tiny cage the size of a coffin. Next slide, Joseph. So as I mentioned, if the EATS Act is overturned, there'll be a lot of consequences. You refer to the Harvard study if you want to see what those are, but one problem or one issue is that the pork industry is the largest, the biggest. The Smithfield Farms is owned by the Wuhan Group, the WH Group. I'm sorry, that was a mistake. But the WH Group in China, 26% of the U.S. market. JBS is a Brazilian firm that controls 40% of the market. So together they hold 40%. As Wayne said, they would prefer to have a uniform playing field across the U.S. So if EATS passes, there will probably be greater foreign control, and whether it's foreign control or not, there'll be more vertical integration, more contract farming. The pork industry will become even more like the broiler industry, which is not good for American farmers. And next slide, might be the last one, please. So what's happened in China, and just in the past 2 to 3 years, they're building high-rise pig buildings, and each of these floors are usually 10 to 12 stories tall. The pig is born at one end, it spends its whole life on that one floor. It's born, it's raised, it's fattened, and then it gets shipped out to be slaughtered. So it never even leaves a floor of a building. And there are buildings all over China right now. And this is one of the consequences of super intensive swine production may come into the US if the EATS Act passes. It may happen even if without EATS pass, the way the industry is going. Next slide, please. And here's another example. I think we counted, there's 21 buildings. This was taken, I believe, in 2022. These are probably done right now. There's at least 21 buildings here, these 10 to 12 story buildings, each filled with, each floor has about 1,300 swine on it. So as I said, if the EATS Act passes, it'll be bad for animals and certainly bad for people. And the final slide, please. So one option, of course, this article came out of the Post in March. They've done this for, you probably heard the cultured, lab-grown or cultivated pork. There's one way to have pork without, having the animal. This is probably, I think pork has been one of the last later comers to that industry. So again, I would just say that the life of a factory pig is very harsh. Prop 12 and question 3 make it better, and EATS will make it worse if that passes. Okay, thank you.
Jim, thank you for that, and thank you for your many sacrifices to advocate for animals. It's been great to see your own personal transformation, having been involved in the high-level industrial agriculture research and having a fresh perspective. These animals are individuals; they are not just populations. And veterinary care is kind of an unknown thing when you have so many animals. How do you give veterinary care when you have 21 buildings of 10 stories with hundreds of thousands or millions of pigs? It just doesn't happen. It's not individualized care. It's not individualized husbandry. It's just stocking animals and automated systems to meet their most basic necessities. And these animals have survival instincts, so they're able to overcome these terrible conditions, and many of them do survive the process of production. But a farmer is supposed to tend to the animals and to shepherd the animals and to provide them care and comfort. This is something very different. It's a very dystopian image to see those Chinese high-rise factory farms. And we have one company controlled by China's government that got a loan from the Bank of China to acquire Smithfield Foods. And the Bank of China is controlled by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. And if that's what they're doing in China and they're controlling Smithfield, why wouldn't they, if they have no regulatory barriers in place, adopt the same production practices here in the United States? To me, it's very logical that the same thought leaders, the same managers are going to behave the same way in the two biggest countries that they exert control over pork production. So that leaves us to Adam Zipkin. I provided an introduction, again, counsel to Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey. Adam, thank you very, very much for taking time from your evening to address folks about these issues. So please share your thoughts with us.
Thank you so much, Wayne, for inviting me to join the webinar and to be part of this really important conversation to help educate people that may not be as familiar with the EATS Act and what is sort of at risk here as Congress is debating the next farm bill. And there's this proposal that would wipe out, Prop 12 in California, but really some of the most important animal welfare laws across the whole country in terms of, as you stated, there's, just by sheer number, there's so many farm animals, and just the degree of suffering every day that we're all sort of forced to just look away because we can't really process it and deal with it. But 5 or 6 years ago, I went with Senator Booker, who, as you mentioned, one of his priorities as a senator is animal welfare and trying to find, areas where we can help animals, whether it's, cats and dogs or sharks or wolves, or in this instance, the focus on farm animals. And 5 or 6 years ago, we went and visited Duplin County, North Carolina. Duplin County is sort of rural part of North Carolina where there's a high concentration of these large factory farms. And unless you actually see it, you showed, there were some pictures that we just saw, but, you can't see the animals because there's just these barns that have no windows, these massive buildings. And then, but what you see is that they're piping the waste out, and there's these massive manure lagoons that they're then spraying the waste onto fields, and you could see the spray sort of drifting onto neighbors' properties. And we met with members of the community, farmers and other rural neighbors of these large factory farms, and just heard horrific stories from them about how, they were prisoners in their own homes. They couldn't open their windows. They couldn't sit out on their porch. They had all types of sort of really high incidences of respiratory diseases and other serious medical conditions as a result of the air pollution and water pollution and smell coming from these big factory farms. And as we have sort of looked at them more closely, what you realize is that, for companies like Smithfield and JBS and Tyson, these, large consolidated multinational companies, they really are the big winners in this system where they're making, record profits by the way they, sort of disregard all the negative externalities that come out of these factory farms, first and foremost being just the sort of torture of the animals. But there's so much more that, the sort of negative impacts on the environment, public health. There's also serious pandemic risk from these big factory farms where they just massively overuse antibiotics, which is leading to, antibiotic resistant bacteria and real life threats to people, all just in the name of sort of the bottom line of maximizing profit and not caring about anything else that you see in these factory farms, where the workers that work in this system are really sort of, mistreated and exploited as well. But so Senator Booker, we came back in sort of response to seeing just the brokenness of that system. And Senator Booker introduced a bill called the Farm System Reform Act, which would put a national moratorium on new large factory farms and would phase out large factory farms over time. And that's the debate that Senator Booker is hoping to have in the coming, years here in Washington, is sort of how can we move away from this system that really doesn't sort of reflect our collective values and move towards a system where, the animals are treated more humanely, the, impacts on rural communities and the environment and public health are not, as negative as they are right now. But rather than, having that conversation about how do we transition away from this terrible model, as you and Jim talked about, we now have the EATS Act, where there's an attempt to, normally when you'd be talking about federal preemption, normally when you'd be talking about Congress having a debate about blocking states from enacting laws in a certain area, it would be because Congress wanted to act in that space. If Congress was looking right now to say, look, we want to set minimum standards across the whole country that farm animals need to be treated humanely, and that there needs to be a floor and there needs to be basic humaneness and standards, whether it's for pigs or chickens or other animals. But that's not what's happening here. What the supporters of the EATS Act, what they're trying to do is it's just complete deregulation. It's just saying that the federal government's not going to do anything, but we're going to block states from legislating in this space. And where that would leave it is the companies get to decide for themselves all the animal welfare standards and the other types of standards related to these factory farms. And we've seen where that leads, right? That leads to the current system of just animals being treated so terribly, being, literally tortured in some instances. And so this is a, sort of, we need to play defense here, and we need to win this fight in order to hopefully move on in coming years and subsequent farm bills to be talking about, ways to transform the system in positive ways. But right now, it is to protect Prop 12 and these really critical farm animal welfare laws across the states, across the country. So Again, just thank you for letting me be part of the webinar.
Well, Adam, thank you very much.
You're
And
muted, Wayne.
how about now? Am I still muted? I think I'm, can you hear me now?
You're good, Wayne.
Yeah. Okay, good. Good. So yes, let me just say that Adam, grateful to you and to Senator Booker. Senator Booker intentionally requested a seat on the Agriculture Committee. That's a committee of lawmakers in the Senate who assembled together to deal with policy issues within the jurisdiction of the agriculture space. And I think he did so, and I don't want to speak for Adam or Senator Booker in this regard, because he knew that a farm bill was coming up. And every 5 years, the Congress deals with agriculture policy very broadly in the farm bill. It has different titles or different sections. So there's a section on commodities. There's a section on nutrition and food. There's a title on agricultural research. There should be a title on animal welfare. I mean, animals are at the center of animal agriculture. We have 10 billion animals raised for food in the United States. And the Agriculture Committee, having oversight over this whole area, you would think would conduct some oversight hearings, some policy hearings, would address some of the problems identified through legislative reforms. And I'm sorry to say it's very few and far between when we have legislative policy reforms. I mean, Senator Booker has the Farm System Reform Act, which Adam mentioned. And then Senator Booker, along with Senator Warren and Senators Paul and Lee, led by Senator Mike Lee of Utah, has a bill to stop abuses of a system of funding for the National Pork Producers Council and the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and others, called the checkoff program, where all the farmers in the United States are taxed, including family farmers, and the money goes into a federal pot, and it funds the staff and the salaries of the National Pork Producers Council and some of the other trade associations. Then they promote their products with it, and they use the money for a number of different purposes, but they're essentially using the money that they get from the checkoff program to favor the industrial farms over the family farmers. How is wiping out state farm animal protection laws, the few laws that exist, and not replacing it with a federal system, and turning loose two foreign-owned corporations who don't want any legal standards for animals or proper treatment? Again, one company owned by China, which has resorted to high-rise factory farms as its new favored model of production. How does that help a family farmer? Can a family farmer afford to build a 10-story high-rise? Of course not. One of the reasons that we were an agrarian nation for 150 years in our history, and obviously have had a big agrarian presence subsequent to more urbanizing forces in our country, is that we as a nation had access to farming, that someone could use his or her skills or the family skills to engage in mixed agriculture or dedicated agriculture around a species or a crop type, and they had access to it. When you have capital needs to produce a high rise, how could you ever have a family farm? You cannot. So what this is going to do is accelerate the demise of the family farm, where animals could have access to pasture, where they could feel sunlight on their backs or soil beneath their feet, where, yes, as one farmer I know says, yes, the animals are going to have a bad day. And he's speaking of slaughter, but the days preceding that don't have to be filled with privation and torment. I mean, when you think about the worst forms of husbandry, I mean, don't we all think, if we see the images that Dr. Keene shared with us about putting a sow in a metal box that's barely larger than her body? So it's so constricting that she is immobilized. She cannot move. I mean, she's an animal with legs. The legs are there for a purpose. Motion and mobility and walking and running are important for physical health and psychological health. But in the world of factory farms, it's just about production. They reduce the animal to a meat producing machine or a piglet producing machine, forgetting that they have lives, forgetting that they have eyes and noses and other senses that may be delighted by the experiences in the world or harmed by the experiences in the world. I mean, when you think of prison and you think of people who get the worst form of punishment, they're put in solitary confinement. What if you had solitary confinement, but you had one after the other with no walls to prevent odors from accumulating, sounds from drowning out the quiet in the world? I mean, the factory farm with sows in these crates, to me, it's a human innovation. And Jim said that, it really began in the 80s. We didn't have all of this for so many decades preceding. It's an incredible innovation when it comes to efficiency, but it's an innovation divorced from conscience. What we need are innovations that are attached to conscience. We need to unleash our human spirit to do things better and to be more efficient, but to do it consistent with our value system. And if we have anti-cruelty laws in our country, if we have 35,000 animal welfare groups, many of the first organizations, started 150 years ago. It's part of the fabric of our society. But how do we disconnect that value system and say, okay, well, we're going to have this value system, but we're going to suspend it for 10 billion animals on factory farms? I mean, that makes no sense to me. And all we did was say that animals should have the opportunity to lie down, stand up, turn around, and freely extend their limbs. Is that some radical animal rights manifesto? No, you would think that's exactly what a farmer would say is needed, because farmers understand animals. Farmers know that animals built to move should be allowed to move. We're simply acting as a proxy for the farmer to say that this is basic. Give the animals an opportunity to move. Yet we have this effort to wipe away these statutes from folks who say they're states' rights advocates. Yet they want to nullify the judgments of tens of millions of voters in the United States who decided this issue. They want to nullify it, and they want to be able to put a company that's controlled by the CCP in charge of the animals. They're valuing, the National Pork Producers Council is valuing the opinions of China's political leaders more than they are valuing the electoral decisions of the American public. I mean, this is an issue of free and fair elections. Are we going to allow the Congress to overturn free and fair elections to give an advantage to industrial farms that are foreign controlled? That is what's at stake with the EATS Act. And if we don't do something about it, if we don't raise our voices and demand that this bill be killed and not attached as an amendment to the Farm Bill, then we are setting our movement back in an extraordinary way. We have made progress over these last 21 years when we had the first ban on gestation crates in the United States and Florida. And we succeeded with a series of other measures that then demonstrated, as I said, the thesis that the American public does care about all animals. And then we had corporations like McDonald's and Costco and Burger King and Cracker Barrel and so many companies in the food retail space all come out and say, we're opposed to gestation crates. We're opposed to battery cages for egg production. But now they want to turn the clock back. They want to wipe out the policies that exist. We cannot allow this to stand. We cannot allow this to stand. It is important that all of us raise our voices, writing letters to the editor, calling and writing your lawmakers, demanding that these federal lawmakers keep their hands off of state statutes that embody our values. We do not want foreign companies controlling agriculture. We do not want this dystopian vision of high-rise factory farms where pigs are crammed in there and never see a ray of sunshine. Never see a ray of sunshine. They are divorced from all of the external factors of nature. They don't see trees. They don't feel sunlight. They don't breathe clean air. They don't feel the wind. They certainly don't feel rain or snow or ice or anything else. They are trapped in these buildings, and then within those buildings, they are trapped in gestation crates. The whole premise of this is so false. We have been working to transition this industry, and it is now a diversified pig industry in the United States. California and Massachusetts, in terms of gestation crate free pork, demand just 6% of all US production. Our research, and we released a report yesterday that Jim was the primary author of, showed that 40% of the industry has already transitioned to group housing, which takes many forms, but it's an alternative to gestation crates where the animals have some opportunity to move. They are claiming, they being the National Pork Producers Council and their allies, are saying California is trying to tell Iowa farmers what to do. Well, the reality is the farming community, the people who are raising pigs, already have sufficient capacity to supply all of what Massachusetts and California need right now. No one's telling them they have to do anything. If you're an Iowa pig farmer, you don't have to sell to California. They can sell to 48 other states. I mean, Massachusetts and California being the two that have these standards. And they sell already to 139 countries. They are falsely arguing that this is going to be an adverse impact on them. What they really should be saying is that America's food retailers, McDonald's and Burger King and Costco and the others that I named earlier, they all have policies against gestation crates. And when those companies actually put their principles to work in terms of their sourcing practices, then they're all going to have to change. But we've been working with those companies. We've been working on these state policies to have a stair-step approach. So now that California and Massachusetts are just about to go online in terms of these new, more humane standards, that provides an incredible market opportunity for the thousands of pig farmers who raise animals in more extensive systems. They want these new policies to go into place. They do not want the EATS Act to undermine their investments. Otherwise, it's just a race to the bottom, a moral race to the bottom, an economic race to the bottom. So again, I can't think of anything more consequential for our movement than defeating the EATS Act. It threatens our laws against puppy mills, even horse slaughter, and a wide range of other threats that an analysis by a legal group at Harvard University and you can search for it online, and you can look at our website, animalwellnessaction.org or centerforhumaneeconomy.org. Look at our press release that we issued yesterday on our report, and we linked to the Harvard report. 1,000 laws at risk, 1,000 in one little ever. There's been no hearing on the EATS Act. There's been no set of witnesses. There's been no proper examination of something that's a massive threat to our country's democratic decision-making and to agriculture policy in 50 states. So I really want to underscore, and I think you can hear the intensity of my voice, that I'm deeply concerned about this, that it's a call to all of us to get active. It is a call not to just leave it to me or to Adam or to Jim. Every one of us has to be active on this issue. And this whole idea that somehow the pig farmers in Iowa are being told what to do by Californians is completely false. It is just a complete phony narrative. It's farming fakery. And, you know, George Orwell wrote a book called Animal Farm, and one of the main characters was named Squealer, a pig. And he was the propagandist in Animal Farm. We haven't heard that kind of nonsense until this EATS Act has been advanced in our contemporary times. I mean, the barnyard has never been full of more nonsense and false framing than it is now with the EATS Act. The state policies on animal welfare were some of the most important things our country has done. They should be protected. All animals deserve humane treatment. So, Joseph, thank you very much for organizing our discussion tonight. Thanks to Jim and Adam. And if we have any questions, I think we're ready to take some.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Adam. So one question, how do we get politicians to see the light? You talked a little bit about that, Wayne. Do we have any kind of action alert we can send people where they can automatically contact their legislators and express their opposition?
Yes, I just sent out an email yesterday. I wrote a letter about the EATS Act and I sent it to so many of our supporters, and embedded in that email is an alert where you get a field. Once you click on the alert, you put your name and address in, and it then identifies who your 2 U.S. senators and your U.S. representative is. We even give you a sample letter, which we encourage you to put to your own words and modify as you wish. But then you modify it, and then you hit send, and it goes to your 3 lawmakers. Now, that is so easy. It takes literally 2 minutes, but we say, please do more. Send that contact form to 5 friends or family members. Call the lawmaker and leave a message with his or her receptionist. Spread the word through a letter to the editor. Write an op-ed. Contact us. Send us an email at info@animalwellnessaction.org and say, hey, I want to do more. We will give you suggestions and advice. So it's, democracy is not a spectator sport. It's a participatory sport and a participatory process. And we have to be involved, especially in moments of crisis. This is a moment of legislative crisis for us.
Thank you, Wayne. I will say in the email you'll receive shortly that'll contain a link to the video of this webinar. We'll be sure to include a link to that action alert so that you can, based on that email, take the action. And if you do forward it to a few of your friends, that will result in literally thousands of communications to Capitol Hill to express our opposition to the EATS Act. Thank you. Panelists, is there a link between this bill and potentially implications for puppy mills or cosmetic testing on animals? How broadly does the EATS Act impact animal welfare?
Well, Adam, do you want to say anything about that?
Well, I think, you mentioned, Wayne, the Harvard report, and, that really gives a detailed list by state of over 1,000, animal welfare type laws, a lot of them that could be at risk. And so I do think that there's sort of direct and indirect serious potential consequences for other animal welfare laws. It's not just about, these farm animal Prop 12 and Massachusetts. There's broader implications, but that as well.
It's clear that the EATS Act is aimed at Prop 12 and Question 3, the ballot measures on farm animals, but it's been written so broadly to talk about any pre-harvest standard that affects any form of agricultural commerce. So it could affect pesticide restrictions at the state level, the overuse of antibiotics. It has enormous implications. They may narrow it if they're legislatively attuned to focus on what they're stating they want to do. But if they do so, then they lose their other argument, which is, the federal government should control all commerce. And if they do it just about pigs, then it's transparent that this is just about a special interest group trying to get relief from state laws, that those state laws basically simply saying that animals built to move should be allowed to move.
Thank you. Another issue brought up is surprise concerning the Chinese ownership of such a large part of our animal agriculture. One person asks, is there a way to reclaim that ownership, and who has a vested interest in making sure they maintain it?
I don't know, Adam, do you want to offer any thoughts on that? I'd be happy to if you don't.
Yeah, I can start us off. Yeah, there's a focus right now in the Senate and the House of Representatives on foreign ownership of farmland and on sort of foreign ownership of these agricultural operations. And, you know, there's real legitimate concerns with having countries like China, you know, who's been sort of accelerating their acquisition of US farms. And so I do think you're going to see Congress potentially put some restrictions on that. And there's also sort of broader just corporate control and corporate acquisition of farmland, both foreign and domestic, that I think Congress needs to take a serious look at, because what we want to have is, you know, opportunities for young farmers, beginning farmers to, you know, be able to get started. A lot of those, you know, farmers who want to have small operations where they could have pasture-based, you know, animals and more humane treatment, and the corporate consolidation of our farmland, especially where it's the foreign ownership, is really problematic. And so I think that it's a serious issue that's going to be getting more and more attention in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, I'll just say that I don't think there's any more vivid example of foreign control of American agriculture than in the pork industry, with two companies controlling 40% of US production. That's just extraordinary, right? And you hear this cliche from a lot of lawmakers, especially as the Farm Bill becomes more and more of a focus and they take action. Food security is national security. It's a cliche because people keep repeating it, but it's true. I mean, food security is important to the health of any nation. I mean, having the ability to produce food and to provide that nutrition, which makes us healthy, keeps us healthy, forestalls hunger, that is crucial for any society. We shouldn't take that for granted. And farmers provide a remarkable service to us by engaging in agriculture. I am by no means anti-agriculture. I'm as pro-agriculture as it comes. I just want agriculture to be sustainable. I want it to be humane. I want it to factor in the values that we observe in our society. If we have consistent rules, and this is where Adam said, you know, the federal government here in the EATS Act, some lawmakers in the federal government are trying to wipe out state laws, but they don't want to have anything replace it. I mean, there's an argument for a level playing field. We should have a national gestation crate ban. That would make things even all over the country for farmers. And consumers would understand, and retailers would know what the rules are. There'd be certainty. And you could phase that in a way that allows the industry to transition. But this EATS Act is just as a meat cleaver to all animal welfare laws.
Wayne, many people are curious about the sponsors of the EATS Act. Who are the main proponents, and what is their agenda? I mean, we've talked about it largely, but what's in it for them?
Well, I think many of the sponsors have gotten the talking points from the National Pork Producers Council. They represent districts that have a high concentration of producers. Now, I think they're hearing just from the producers, mainly from the producers who are the industrial style producers. And Ashley Hinson from Northeast Iowa is the author of the House EATS Act. She doesn't have much of a record on animal welfare to speak of. I can't think of her co-sponsoring any animal welfare bills, not the animal fighting bill that Senator Booker has introduced in the Senate with Senator John Kennedy, a Republican. She hasn't supported the Puppy Protection Act, which deals with puppy mills. I always had a terrible problem with puppy mills. She hasn't supported the horse slaughter bill. So there's no real record there in terms of supporting animal welfare. Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas is the Senate lead, and he has been helpful on some animal welfare issues. He was an important co-sponsor of the FDA Modernization Act. He was a co-sponsor of the Big Cat Public Safety Act to ban the trade and breeding in big cats for use as pets. And we got both of those bills over the finish line last Congress. So that was great that we had his support. When he was in the House, before he was a senator, he was supportive of our efforts to combat dogfighting and cockfighting. So we disagree with him on the EATS Act, but we work with him on some other issues. And I think that the lawmakers, I must say, I think they've just gotten hoodwinked on this issue. They don't understand, I think, that the pork industry is diversified enough that there's not going to be a major economic consequence for it, because they already have been transitioning, as I said, over 20 years to have group housing systems. And, you know, to wipe out these state laws on cage-free production. I mean, the egg industry has invested $3 billion over this 20-year period in new housing systems to give the hens more space and to live in cage-free environments. I mean, you could have eggs coming in from Mexico, you could have eggs coming in from some giant factory farms here in the United States and undercut those producers and drive them out of business. I think Americans are willing to pay a couple more cents for food in order to honor our values about animal welfare. I mean, we pay for food for our pets, and we go to the veterinarian's office when our animals need vaccinations. I mean, animals are part of our society. Since when do we take this miserly attitude that we can't do a damn thing for them? That is not who we are as a people. It's not who we are.
All right, very good. Thank you, Wayne. Let me ask you to put on your prognosticator hat. How likely is the EATS Act to pass?
Well, let me just say that there was a prior incarnation of it called the King Amendment. It was named after Steve King, a former Iowa congressman who was, you know, really very much against most animal welfare policies. I can't think of any that he supported, but he was a very, very hardworking lawmaker, and he was very earnest about what he was doing. And we were able to defeat his King Amendment on the 2014 Farm Bill and then the 2018 Farm Bill. And we actually got some good pro-animal things done, as well as playing defense on that issue. That's the outcome that we want this time. We want to defeat the EATS Act, and we want to pass Senator Booker's FIGHT Act to strengthen our laws against dogfighting and cockfighting. We want to finally ban all horse slaughter and stop the live export of American horses to Canada and Mexico for slaughter for human consumption, sent mainly to China and Russia and a couple of European countries. We want to finally ban greyhound racing. It's been on the decline in the United States. We have bipartisan support in both chambers for all of those measures. We've got a number of other important measures dealing with puppy mills and horse soaring, and giving kids a plant-based milk option so we don't have a milk mandate in a country where half the kids in the national school lunch program are lactose intolerant. So we've got a big set of issues on this farm bill that we want to contend with. And I feel hopeful that if we do what we need to do, if we are aggressive and diligent, and we don't leave it up to somebody else, we're going to have good outcomes in all these realms. And I know that we're, just throwing it over to Adam. I mean, we've never had a Senator Booker on the Ag Committee to help be a voice for animal welfare like we have in him.
Well, thank you, Wayne. And I think, the prognostication question, it's in our hands. Like, at the end of the day, the industry that supports the EATS Act is very vocal, and they're doing a lot of outreach to members of Congress. And so it's really important for the people listening here tonight who really prioritize animal welfare to make sure that your congressperson and your senators are hearing from you, because that really is ultimately what has a big influence on how members of Congress vote, is what they're hearing from their constituents. And if it's just one-sided, we can't just trust that there's going to be a good outcome here. We need to really be making sure that people who learn about this issue and aware of it and care about it are making their voices heard. And then I do think that we can achieve a good outcome again.
All right. Very good. Thank you. We've reached the top of the hour. so we want to wrap up. Wayne, when do we expect a vote on this? What's the timing look like for us?
Good question, Joseph. We're now in what's called a recess. I mean, the lawmakers really never stop, but they're not in session in the U.S. House, in the physical U.S. House building on the floor, nor are they in the Senate. The Senate comes back on September 5th, and the House comes back a week later. We thought originally that September would be the month because the prior farm bill, again, this bill is done every 5 years or so, expires on September 30th. They'll probably extend that deadline. They're allowed to do that and push that back. I think October is the time when we may see a farm bill come out. So we've got a lot of work to do over these next 6, 7, 8 weeks. I know we are working hard on a letter from U.S. House members to the chairman and ranking member of the Ag Committee in both chambers. There's a House letter and a Senate letter. That House letter already has 130 House members saying defeat the EATS Act, do not include it as an amendment to the Farm Bill. Nearly 30 senators have signed on to a similar letter in that chamber. So there's action being taken, and a lot of lawmakers are already lining up on our side. We've sent out a lot of alerts, Joseph, to our supporters, and thousands of them have taken action. And that action that they've taken is translating into definitive positions by lawmakers against the EATS Act. I think that we stand a very, very good chance of prevailing, but we cannot relent. There's so much at stake here. 22 million Americans voted for the 5 farm animal welfare ballot measures. And we're negating their votes just on the whimsy of a small set of lawmakers carrying this effort by the National Pork Producers Council. I mean, we just can't let it stand. So we've got a little time, but now is the moment for us to act.
All right, and that's a good concluding point. We are super pleased by the number of questions you put to us, and unfortunately, we're not able to answer them all. We'll send you quite a bit of information when we send out the follow-up that will include the link to this webinar. But we are grateful that you were here. Adam Zipkin, thank you so much for taking time to be with us. Dr. Jim Keene, terrific. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you. And Wayne, of course, always passion and logic combined. Great arguments against the EATS Act today. Thank you all so much for attending. I really do appreciate it. Be sure to visit animalwellnessaction.org, Center for a Humane Economy.org. You're already subscribed by virtue of attending this webinar to our news and information. Please take action when we send you something. It really does matter. And again, because we are a nonprofit relying solely on your donations, please do consider making us part of your philanthropic endeavor. We'll have another webinar up soon. You'll be alerted to it, and I hope you'll join us then for another discussion of how you, our fans, our followers, the citizens, the people who love animals can really make a difference for them. And so with that, I'll say thank you again. Good night, everyone.